Welcome back. All right, so I was looking through the channel. It's been a while since I've discussed my journey as a wrestling fan. And so I feel like, you know what? I might as well discuss it now. So, my fandom for wrestling really came into its own in 1985. Prior to that, I mean, I watched it. I used to watch All Star Wrestling, which is the local promotion, at least one of the local promotions. There are various promotions in Western Canada, All Star Wrestling being one of them. There's another, I think it's Canadian Extreme, something along those lines. They have events at the Commodore. And they have some pretty big names come into the Commodore Ballroom too for those ones. But wrestling's always been big in Canada. Now, we understand it's scripted. We understand that, the word fake gets thrown around. I don't like to use the word fake because to me, when something's fake, there's no risk. And there's obviously a risk with wrestling. We have seen guys get seriously hurt in wrestling matches. We have seen where tables are supposed to break and don't, that can cause injury. We have seen people go through glass that causes injury. We have seen people fall and get badly hurt through a fall that may or may not have been planned and just went wrong when it happened, right? So I'm not one of these fans that gets all upset when you see somebody take a fall and you can tell that what they landed on was gimmicked so that it didn't really have an impact. They were okay. Because I've seen fans say, "Oh, you could tell that was fake." Okay, so you want them to really land on concrete and potentially end up paralyzed? Good to know. And so I'm never gonna make that argument. I'm never gonna be the one that says, "Oh, there needs to be more blood in wrestling." I think it gets ridiculous. And I think it's something that you have to watch because if guys are getting cut open and bloodied in one match and not in the other, makes it look like the guys aren't trying as hard in the other. So that's where things get kind of a little bit tricky. But I'm gonna start with my journey back in '85. WrestleMania came around. I watched the Saturday Night Live before WrestleMania where Hulk Hogan and Mr. T hosted it. I was a fan of Mr. T. I was never big on Hulk Hogan, so I might as well throw this in here. I always thought Hulk Hogan came across as fake. I always thought his promos came across as fake. He was very loud. He was very chatty, but I never thought he said anything. I thought he had the same promo 50 million times. So, like, I just found it aggravating. And then he would never lose. So he'd wrestle like maybe 4 or 5 times a year. At least that's how it felt to me watching it as a teenager. And then he'd come in. So you'd have whoever he was feuding with doing all the heavy lifting. And then he'd just come in and squash him and leave. And I'm like, well, all right. And so I was left cheering for King Kong Bundy, cheering for Paul Orndorff, cheering for Randy Savage, cheering for Andre the Giant, seemingly against all odds because Hulk Hogan was the guy. And so when I hear people complaining about how certain wrestlers hold on to the title for too long, I think to myself, you weren't around for the Hogan era. It was awful. Anytime that a wrestler started getting over, Hogan would kind of squash it. So that was definitely a problem, and it's too bad because it meant that a guy like Jake Roberts never had the title and should have. If Jake Roberts had flattened Hulk Hogan and, give him the DDT, pinned him for a 3 count, put the snake on him at Mania, fans would have gone nuts. Fans would have gone crazy. I would have gone crazy. I would have jumped up and down on my couch. I would have been so excited because I couldn't stand him. I just thought he was fake. So when he made the heel turn in WCW, I remember people like, "Can you believe he's a heel?" And I'm like, I can't believe it took this long. I was the only person who agreed with Bobby Heenan every single time. Every time Hogan said, or every time he's talking about Hogan, he's like, all Hogan cares about is himself. I'm like, Heenan's right. I'm not sure what Gorilla Monsoon's arguing with him for, because he's right. I didn't like him. So I watched NWA, which became WCW. It was Worldwide Wrestling. I'd stay up late on a Saturday. I've talked about that on this channel before. I watched Stampede Wrestling. That was on Saturday and Sunday afternoons. I think there was a replay on Sunday of the Saturday show. Cuban Assassin, he was awesome. Cuban Assassin was great. And Jason the Terrible and various others. AWA I never really got into. AWA was almost too old school for me, so it was really old school, plus the production value wasn't very high. The one thing they had when I watched them was the Road Warriors, before they became the Legion of Doom in WWE. And they would go back and forth, it seemed, between different companies. Back then, going back and forth between territories was not unheard of. And then Vince started buying them all up. So Vince starts buying up the territories for their basically so that he can have ownership of all their matches, put out VHS tapes on all the various companies. I would also watch UWF, which was Universal Wrestling Federation, which was out of Florida. Dr. Death Steve Williams, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, One Man Gang. A lot of, I thought, pretty good wrestlers down there. I think the Freebirds were in that one as well. And then that sadly didn't last that long. I actually really liked the wrestling on it, though. I think that was right after World Wrestling, or not World Wrestling, Worldwide Wrestling, WWW, which became WCW. It was a lot to keep track of back then. There was a lot of letters. And thankfully, I was pretty good with letters. But eventually it became WWF, and of course WCW would emerge. And then you had Raw versus Nitro. I was always a Raw guy. The dramas that occurred, so one of the reasons I'm doing this is because the dramas of Bret and Shawn were brought up. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels knew they didn't like each other. We knew they didn't like each other. It meant that when they cut promos against each other, we would get the popcorn and enjoy every single moment of it. They were great. And, it's interesting because Shawn Michaels infamously talked about Bret Hart having sunny days, hinting that maybe he was having an affair with Sunny, which, of course, Bret's then wife wasn't happy about either. And so there was all this drama, but they would still get in the ring. They would still be professionals. And it made the matches better because you would know deep down, these guys really don't like each other. So I was talking about AEW, and I mentioned in the comments, they haven't made a cent off of all the drama with CM Punk. Not a cent. They haven't monetized it at all. If I was running it, I would sit the Elite down, I'd sit Punk down and say, look, I'm putting you guys in a program together. And if you can't handle it, oh well. I think this will make buckets of money. Would you like a bucket of money? Would you like a bucket of money? We agree. We'd like a bucket of money. And it would sell. It would absolutely work. So back in the day, guys had problems with each other, beef with each other. All right, well, we'll throw them into a feud with each other. The ultimate example of that from WWF would be Matt Hardy with Lita. Lita steps out on him with Edge. And that became a storyline. They fire Matt. Matt makes this big public stink about it. So WWF hires him back and puts him in a feud with Edge. Which we as fans watched and went, how much of this is real? If you watched wrestling back then, when Matt Hardy showed up in the crowd at a WWF event and attacked Edge over the railing, you had that moment of saying, is this real? Did Matt Hardy buy a ticket and attack Adam Copeland? So you take away their wrestling names and you're just going, is this real? Now the reason that I as a fan knew it was not real, that this was set up, is because the camera didn't immediately cut away. Generally, if a fan gets involved or if something happened that's not supposed to, they'll cut to commercial or they'll cut to a different camera altogether. They do not want to give any credence to what's going on at that point. And so that's definitely, think back to like when Enzo Amore gets into a WWE event, tries to say, hey, look, I'm here. And not for long, you're not. And they got him out of there and they did not have him on camera any more than they needed to. So that's how you can tell when it's real versus when it's not. Is, does WWE cut away? No, it's probably set up. But they would monetize that. They would make that work. So if two guys have beef backstage, cool. Keep your hands to yourselves. Go out to the ring and have a match. You're supposed to be a professional. It's no different than any other workplace. You should be able to work with people even if you don't like them. I had crap jobs for decades before I was a YouTuber. I would regularly be paired off with somebody I didn't like. Where they would say, okay, Shannon, for this round, you're going to be doing this job with this person. And my answer would be, well, can I do something else? And be like, I'm sorry, but you have to do this. And so you swallow your pride and you do it. As a wrestler, your job is to go out there and entertain. And also, as a person running a wrestling company, your job is to make money. Where ECW struggled was with the making money part. Paul Heyman was good at putting together the spectacle. He was great at telling a story. The stories were great. I was never big on ECW. There was too much blood and there was no rules. And so for me, it was kind of like, Because the other problem is, the one issue I've always kind of had with the hardcore wrestling side of it, whether it's a bat, whether it's barbed wire, whatever it is, it's still choreographed. So you can still see that they're pulling punches. You can still see they're not really trying to hurt each other. You can still see if a guy's blading. You can still see all this. And so, it becomes difficult. Plus, if you've watched UFC, if you've watched real fighting, you can tell with wrestling that it's choreographed. I have nothing but respect for what guys like Terry Funk, rest in peace, Mick Foley, and others did in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. But I do think that if you have a lot of the hardcore stuff in ECW, almost every match was over the top, it just loses its effect. I think where things are good is when the match is important. I've mentioned before the diminishing returns for WWE when it comes to their specialty matches. Hell in a Cell being a pay-per-view, terrible idea. Elimination Chamber as a pay-per-view, I'm not a huge fan of that either. But Elimination Chamber I can get behind. The one thing is that Hell in a Cell was supposed to be the ultimate way to end a feud. And now it's another match type. So when I started out watching wrestling back in the mid-'80s, it was the cage. The cage finished the feud. That was how you'd get the heel in there, and he was not going to get away. And all of his buddies weren't going to interfere. Now, of course, they would, and he did get away, which made it more frustrating if it was Ric Flair. But there were some my favorite matches ever. Tito Santana beating Greg the Hammer Valentine in a cage. Dusty Rhodes beating Ric Flair in a steel cage in a match that went the entire hour for that program. And I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. And it was because that cage, it felt like this is a big deal. And now in wrestling, it's another stipulation. It's not necessarily a big deal. One thing that I do think that AEW's had is that problem where they have certain match types that I think they do too much of. There's too many trios matches, I think. And I'm a six-man tag fan. I want to say in NWA that Dusty Rhodes and the Road Warriors were the six-man tag champs fighting with three of the Four Horsemen. It wouldn't have been Ric Flair. It would have been Tully Blanchard, Arn Anderson. I want to say Ole Anderson. I want to say it was before Ole ended up having to leave, and then Wyndham came in. Wyndham face turn, heel turn was almost as bad back then as Paul White would be later as the Big Show. But things have changed. From 1985 until now, things have dramatically changed with wrestling. The style of wrestling's completely different. I talked about this not too long ago. The plotting style, how you would build up a match, that's gone. Now it's go, 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 go. Get all your high-flying moves in. Make sure you get your dives. You have to do at least 3 through the ropes every match, it seems, minimum. Which, again, as I said, it's the law of diminishing returns. You don't get excited, right? It is what it is. The only thing I look for now is, did he catch him? And I always kind of get a kick out of it when the wrestler outside the ring doesn't catch them properly, and then the wrestler jumping out of the ring kind of has to make sure they land on their feet, or at the very least they protect themselves. It is a much bigger business now than what it was back in 85. So when we start talking about wrestling, how wrestling was, whether it's 80s, whether it's 90s, Attitude Era, it's changed. We can't go back to that. The stuff that wrestlers would get away with back then, you wouldn't get away with now. So getting back to Bret and Shawn, there were a couple of backstage altercations that took place. In general, it wasn't that bad. On Dark Side of the Ring, they did talk about Shawn Michaels and him flipping out about Bret. I don't remember. It was something that Bret did, kind of just, gave him a little bit of a smack upside the head, and he complained that, it was unsafe working conditions, which is true. And this is the difference, too, between wrestling back then and now. It's a business. It's a workplace. And yes, they go out to the ring and they have fights. They are structured. They are scripted. Backstage, there should not be a time where it's okay to smack a guy in the head, where it's okay to attack somebody backstage. That shouldn't be allowed for the same reason it's not allowed at other workplaces. I'm not saying that everybody has to be immediately fired or anything, because you would be fired from your regular job if you did that kind of thing, obviously. But there needs to be a standard. There needs to be an example set for everybody else in the locker room. At times, you have to set an example. You have to set a good example, especially your veteran wrestlers. So you're going to hold your veteran wrestlers to a higher standard than the new guy who's just coming in, right? And of course, with it being a bigger business and treating it more like a job and like a workplace rather than the way it was this carnival atmosphere backstage, and this idea that wrestling is this really shady business. Can't have that now. And the internet has changed everything. We know. So we always suspected, right? We always suspected. So even when David Schultz is smacking a reporter upside the head for asking him if wrestling's fake, he's like, "Do you think is that fake?" And damaged the guy's eardrum. So not exactly the best thing to do. And I'm sure Vince McMahon was cursing about David Schultz on that one. But with the internet now, and just with the fact too that wrestling shows us the behind the scenes stuff, it means it's more important now for wrestling to make sure that the backstage politics are kept to a minimum, that the arguments and fights backstage are kept to an absolute bare minimum, if not completely eliminated. It is a totally different setup than what it was. The program on TV doesn't come across the same at all. I think the fact that now, and it feels like AEW is starting to get into this territory too. Why are they allergic to clean finishes? Why? You used to get clean finishes in wrestling, and sometimes the bad guy won, and it was frustrating, but the bad guy would win. Maybe he hooked the tights, but a lot of the time it was just he was a little more violent than the good guy. He was willing to take those shots in the corner when the good guy might just back off. He instead forearm right to the jaw. So, I mean, really, it was normal for a good guy to lose here and there, and it didn't destroy them. I think that the idea that losing a match means, oh no, this is going to ruin my character. Why? How fragile is your character? So that's one beef that I have with it is every time I'm watching a match, I shouldn't be thinking, okay, so who's going to run in? Or especially when you're ahead of it. When you're watching a match, and this seems to happen a lot with Raw and SmackDown, we're watching a match and at the beginning you're like, well, clearly this is going to end with a run-in by insert name of wrestler here. Or you'll see two guys against each other and you'll shrug and go, well, they can't give a clean victory to either of these guys, so double count out, double disqualification, what are they going to do here? And so that's where I think there's an issue, but AEW started doing it as well. They were big on not doing it, but it's kind of crept in there, and it's something I think to keep an eye on. The one thing I do wonder is, so you've got Tony Khan owning AEW and of course ROH, which we'll see if ROH can survive as its own entity. WWE, of course, being the other power broker. And there's other companies globally that are very good wrestling companies. Japan, you've got various wrestling companies. Mexico has at least two really good wrestling companies there as well. So if you're a professional wrestler, you can earn your money. You don't have to go to WWE or AEW, although they likely pay the highest out of all the companies, right? Although, again, Japan, I think you can make a really good living. But at this stage of the game, I do wonder, like, would there be room for another wrestling program at some point in time? I don't think we'll ever get back to the old territory days, which is too bad. One thing that I miss is that every program had its own feel. Every program had its own way of booking. Every program had, like, I'll go back to Stampede. Stampede was brilliant. Stampede Wrestling, run by Stu Hart, was absolutely brilliant. I loved that wrestling. They understood how amazing of a babyface Owen Hart could be. And sadly, we never saw that in WWE. I remember, and he's a great heel. I'm not going to say Owen Hart wasn't a great heel. He was. But man, could Owen Hart be the absolute ultimate babyface? Yes. I saw that in Stampede, and I thought he was fantastic. But that's one of those things, you know, where Stampede had a really good idea for how to build wrestlers up. And I feel like at times WWE and AEW have gotten it right, but at other times they've dropped the ball. And just being able to build a wrestler up a little bit at a time, don't rush it, is really important. I think at times they will try to rush to get that next big star, who's the next Brock Lesnar, who's the next Becky Lynch for the women. And I think they do it to the detriment of wrestlers who are there paying their dues as well. It has to be frustrating for longtime wrestlers to see somebody brand new come in and just shoot ahead of them on the card. There's definitely there's definitely something to be said for wrestlers needing to grab the brass ring, as has been said, of course, in WWE. But it does feel like sometimes that ring is reserved for a certain body type, reserved for guys of a certain size, for ladies who look a certain way. If it's on the women's side and you're looking for somebody to be at the very top. One WWE wrestler, Cora Jade, she went out and she came back. She's had some enhancements. And Dana Brooke was the one that immediately noticed and made a comment, asked if the company paid for that. So that still happens. That's still out there. That's still, and it works. Look at Nikki Bella. It works. You go out, you get certain enhancements. You work on your in-ring style, you'll likely get pushed. So there's that. But anyways, I just wanted to make a nice wrestling. I was going to say quick, but it's 20 minutes. I wanted to make a wrestling video today because while I'm known as the hockey guy, I've watched wrestling for many years. It's just because of the hockey channel and how big the hockey channel is. That's obviously going to be where a majority of my interest is going to be. But don't underestimate my interest in wrestling and my ability to consume a lot of wrestling content. I follow Wrestling with Regret. I follow the Jim Cornette Experience, his podcasts. I look at the videos on YouTube where they just take the clips from it, because his actual podcast is like 4 hours, and it just that's a lot. Jim's a very entertaining guy, but 4 hours tends to be a lot. Wrestle Talk and What Culture Wrestling I've watched as well. More with What Culture, it's really Simon Miller. Simon Miller is absolutely fantastic and deserves every bit of success he's had on this platform. Absolutely great. And he is a very positive Pete, as he says. There are times where he'll give a show like a whole bunch of thumbs up, and I'm thinking, I don't think we watched the same show, and that's both on AEW and WWE. But he finds the best in everything, which is nice. It's nice to see that positivity, and as New Day would say, that's the power of positivity, right? All right, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and if I was going to name like all-time favorite wrestlers, I've talked about this before, but Bret Hart would be my all-time favorite, I think. With women, probably Mickie James up there, and Trish Stratus would be up there as well. But Mickie James, I think, probably among the most underrated. That's the way of putting it. I didn't feel like she was at the top nearly as long as she should have been. And then they were mocking her for her weight, which I never understood, because I was like, so they're talking about her being fat. They know, have they seen Mickie James? Because she's not, sure, she's not 80 pounds, but she's not, I didn't get it. Anyways, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.